So imperialism in China is quite a bit different from the imperialism that occurred in Africa and what we talked about with the Congo. So let's get into the perspective of the Chinese prior to the Europeans coming, and then the effect of the Europeans on the Chinese. So China has a foundation of strong cultural pride for a lot of good reasons. I mean, they were very developed and they had a strong military. But China saw themselves up until really the early 1800s as the central kingdom. They believed that all other peoples were subordinate to them. China alone, they believed, was civilized. Imperial officials actually believed that foreign trade was a gift that they gave to the West, and it was symbolic of the emperor's benevolent attitude. Trade was a privilege, not a necessity. So the attitude towards the West, essentially from the 1500s to the 1800s, was that China was in control of trade relations with the West. During this time, China, which had been united since the 13th century, was much stronger than Europe. China's central government controlled the trade with the West very tightly. In fact, again, China felt that they were self-sufficient, and if necessary, they really didn't need to trade with Europe. China is only going to accept one thing in exchange for things like tea, silk, and other goods that the Chinese made that were very well respected and cherished in places like Britain and the rest of Europe. They will only accept silver. And they created essentially that created a very bad trading partner for Britain, because Britain was seeing all of its silver exit the country, which is again a sign of wealth. And they were getting something in return, but they felt like it wasn't even. Like China wasn't buying their products. So Britain is always looking for a way to change this. And the tide will turn as the British become more dependent on their trade. China is looking for, Britain is looking for a way to entice the Chinese into buying something from them so that they can actually change that balance of trade. Because tea is becoming an everyday drink in Britain, and so there really is so much money going to China and so little coming into Britain. So the East India Company is a large trading company that found an item that the Chinese would buy, and it was something that was grown in India and then brought over to China. This product is the product that I call everyone wants. It is opium. And actually, let's go back and talk a little bit about how much opium is coming into China. Opium is incredibly addictive, and it was actually outlawed in China. But still, even with that outlaw, you had in 1835 27,000 chests of opium weighing approximately 133 pounds each delivered in China. What they did is you had a lot of corruption that occurred. So local officials were paid off. Some of them were even addicted to opium, but they were definitely given money and they were addicted to that. And they were paid off in exchange for turning a blind eye as the opium came into the country. And what the British decided to accept in exchange for this lovely opium was silver. So the outflow of silver started to occur as silver came back to Britain as a result of the opium trade. China is going to try to put a stop to this opium trade, and they are going to start the Opium Wars. Now, the Opium Wars are going to occur in 1839 is when they start, and they last until 1842. Britain, because of its great weaponry, its cannons and gunboats, was really too advanced for China, and China was heavily defeated. Britain is going to win, and the trade in China is going to open up to the West. So by the end of the 1800s, China was turned into a semi-colony. Now, I will tell you, it says Britain's going to win. Britain was one of the major players, but you also had during this first war, you're going to have other countries who are also trading in China that are going to support the British. Not necessarily militarily, but definitely lending its economic support. So trade is forced open. The peace treaty that is signed is called the Treaty of Nanjing, and it's signed in 1842 to end the war. And in this treaty, Britain again is turned into, turns China into a semi-colony. Some of the effects of the actual treaty, the Treaty of Nanjing, is that the British people are granted what's called extraterritorial rights. It's essentially like what the ambassadors who reside maybe in Washington, D.C. in an embassy would experience in the United States, but even more so. Meaning that they're under the British would be under the laws of Britain, not under the laws of the Chinese. Just like some people who come to the United States, if they're ambassadors, they are under the laws of their home country, not necessarily the U.S. laws. But actually, most ambassadors are under the U.S. laws today. But again, extraterritorial rights just gave the British the opportunity to go into China and do what they pleased and not have to abide by any of the laws put down by the Qing dynasty. Another thing is that these spheres of influence are set up. And let me show you this map really quick. So you see that the lighter colors are the spheres of influence around here. And you can see that you've got the Japanese involved. You also have areas that are territories or actual imperial, they're controlled by the countries, more like what you would see in Africa. But the spheres of influence, Japan is highly involved here. You've got Japan having colonies plus spheres of influence. You have the British really that are right here in the middle and near Shanghai. And then you've got Russians also up here with spheres of influence, way up here. And then you've got down here, you've got the French involved. And then you also, it's kind of hard to see, but right here, Germany had some territory. And I don't know why they would put Portuguese as white. I think it's supposed to be a really light yellow, which I can't really see right now. But anyway, you get the idea of how controlled China is. And we all know this is the Gobi Desert up here in Mongolia, which is not very populated. So most of the areas where there's any population is controlled by outsiders. So spheres of influence are set up. And then there's also something called the open door policy, which the Secretary of State from the United States, John Hay, H-A-Y, at this time was able to get. And again, a lot of these leaders during this time period are for free trade because, again, they're over there for economic reasons. So John Hay is actually, after a lot of convincing, and the United States is actually going to fight in another war, and I'll talk about it, that really this open door policy came out of that war a little bit more, and we'll talk about it, the Boxer Rebellion, where the United States actually lent a hand militarily, and so as a result, China is really opened up to trade with all the European countries and the United States, because of course the United States wants in on this, what shall we call it? They call it carving up the melon for Asia. Africa, it's the cake. Here it's the melon. The next thing that you need to know is, let me see, the effects of imperialism overall. So again, this isn't very complicated, but the depressed economic conditions for the European, for the Chinese. There's an unequal trade partnership now where most is going out of China and not benefiting China. You're going to have peasant revolts, and I'm going to talk about those in a second. I think they come up later. And then you're going to have a strengthening of nationalism or Chinese culture during this time period, which is again going to lead to the Chinese wanting to get rid of anything that they see as foreign when they get a chance. And that will come sooner than you think. So one of the best known rebellions and most important rebellions for really changing the attitude of the Chinese towards the Europeans is called the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion will occur from 1898 to 1900. It's essentially an anti-foreign, anti-Christian rebellion that starts with Chinese people attacking European trading areas and actual Europeans who are living in China and conducting their trade. And so the result is that there is a coalition including United States, Britain, Germany, Russia, and Japan who all fight the Boxers and end up winning, of course. And the result is that the Boxer Protocol is created, and I don't think it's going to show up, but the Boxer Protocol in 1901, which resulted in all the supporters of the Boxers and the government of the Qing dynasty, they were executed. And then the Chinese government was made to pay 67 million pounds of silver over 39 years to the different countries who were involved in fighting the Boxers. The result, again, is that the Europeans win, including the United States, and the Chinese are under the control of them. So effects of the Boxer Rebellion. There's two different ways of thinking that come out of the Boxer Rebellion. The first is that the Chinese should be more like the Europeans, so they should modernize, and that there should be more nationalism or national pride in their country, or there's a fear of change, and that actually will lead to a civil war that's going to occur in China. So the first president of China, because the Qing dynasty will go away, the first president in China is Sun Yat-sen in 1912. And he's part of the Nationalist Party. So you can see that the first way of thinking won out, which is not sticking with the old dynasty, but changing and modernizing. And he's a nationalist. He supports China. He is very focused on China for the Chinese. But he believes that in order to do that, you need to have a change, in that China needs to modernize and become more like, a little bit like Europe. So he runs on the principles of the people, which are nationalism, and he wants to end foreign control. He believes in people's rights and democracy, so more of the liberal ideas of the Europeans. And then he believes that people's livelihood is a necessity, and that it comes from economic security, which is capitalism. So again, a lot of foreign ideas, but with a nationalistic twist, where they say, okay, we're going to take these foreign ideas, but we're going to make them Chinese. Sun Yat-sen is actually going to have a civil war that occurs when he is attempting to set up this new republic. Peasants are going to suffer the most. Warlords from different regions are going to really just tear apart the country, and famine is going to kill millions during this time period. So the result is that he's going to lose power. China is really going to go into chaos during the time of World War I, which is coming up in Europe. So, and when they emerge out of World War I, they're going to be looking towards new ideas, and a lot of people are looking towards socialism and eventually communism. So, graphic organizer here. Chinese think they're the central kingdom. They believe they're self-sufficient. They have a closed door to trade, but the Opium Wars occur. It opens them up to trade. It makes them spheres of influence with the Treaty of Nanjing. The open door policy makes it so their trade is opened up. Extraterritorial rights allow the Europeans and the Americans to pretty much come in and do whatever they want, and they send a lot of missionaries. Boxer Rebellion occurs, which again solidifies the Europeans in charge of China, because the Boxer Protocols make it so that the Chinese have to pay tons of money back to, money that they really can't pay, back to European countries. So the result is that the Qing dynasty falls, Sun Yat-sen comes to power, but a civil war erupts, and it's just chaotic until really they turn to communism. And that's it.